Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the NextGen Planners podcast. My name is Amelia Hamilton, and I am the head of community here at NextGen Planners. And every week, I have the pleasure of talking to a wonderful expert in our field or adjacent about some interesting topic or aspect of financial planning. And this week I am very excited as I am joined by Daniel Gornall from Centurion Financial Planners. Welcome. How are you doing?
Yeah, very well. Thanks, Amelia.
Excellent. So to kick things off then and to get started with the podcast, we like to ask all our guests, what does a day in the life look like for you? To give people a bit of an idea of what you get up to, where you do it, how you do it, all of that's good stuff. So handing it over to you, what does a day in the life look like for Daniel Gornall?
Sure. So I suppose the good thing about our profession as financial planners is that no 2 days are the same. Every day is different, which keeps things exciting. But typically, as a divorce financial planner, a typical day involves a mix of client consultations, financial analysis, and a lot of collaboration with family lawyers. So yeah, each of the family lawyers that I work with have different clients with different challenges, and when they refer them across to me, we could be talking about anything from how to split assets, how to look at pensions, and what their financial future looks like, and where it is I might be able to assist. So there's a lot of that, and also just kind of keeping on top of things like legal and financial developments, just to make sure that my kind of skills are kind of kept topped up, and with any changes as they inevitably happen through legislation and legal changes. That was one of the things that I had to get used to in working with solicitors. It wasn't just keeping on top of the FCA and our own financial challenges and changes that happen, but also what's happening in the legal world as well. So it's kind of two lots of CPD essentially that I have to do now, which is interesting.
Yeah, I'm sure no one's envying you on that side of things.
Sure.
There. But like it's a really interesting area of financial planning, and as you mentioned, this is where your specialism is. This is where your expertise lies in divorce work, and that's kind of what we're talking about today in the podcast. And we're going to look at things from a technical perspective and all the way through to understanding some of the more emotional sides of this process and how best to navigate that as a financial planner. But I guess my first question actually is, how did you end up in this field? What attracted you to this area? And as you mentioned, there's a lot of kind of cross section working with different professions. Is that something that attracted you to this area? Or, yeah, what was it?
I suppose with a lot of kind of specialisms, it's sort of happened by accident, to be honest. I kind of came up through financial planning as a power planner for the most part, until I got chartered, and then started to kind of give advice. Initially looking after a large kind of back book of clients, but then starting to look towards getting my own clients. I found it a bit of a struggle finding new clients, just because I was kind of giving all sorts of advice to all sorts of people essentially, and actually found that by specializing in a small area, even though you're really kind of massively reducing your target market, it just means that you become an expert in that area, and there's less, I suppose, competition as such for where people should go to. And when it comes to divorce and how I fell into that, is really just through dealing with clients that happen to be going through it, supporting them through the process, and then just finding that actually this is a really useful area for a financial planner to get involved. A lot of value can be added to someone going through this process, and often the party I'm dealing with has probably less financial knowledge, so you're really kind of helping add that value in terms of helping them through. So yeah, it's just incredibly rewarding, and that's sort of kind of how I fell into it.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds as if it is, because I guess from kind of looking at things a few steps back, going, well, divorce, that feels like quite a heavy and quite a tricky topic to navigate. But actually, as you say, if you look at where can I be of use to someone, it's who is going through a tough time, where you can be there and really help them to work out, how can I make this the best possible situation for me? And I'm sure the place that they end up from the place where they started is night and day, and being able to set someone up so that they can, feel positively about the rest of their lives, hopefully, is very satisfying as a financial planner.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a lot of kind of key things that a lot of the clients will face going through the process. And it's often kind of pre-settlement when I get involved. So most of my clients, I mean, 95% of clients that I deal with now are referred to me from family lawyers. I work all across the Southwest and even beyond, because I suppose with remote working, there's no real bounds to how far we can operate. But for the most part, I deal with mostly people in the Southwest. And the clients that are referred to me are often, like I said, the clients that have less financial knowledge. So probably not the main earners of the family, probably not used to dealing with the finances in the relationship. So need a little bit more guidance and support and leveling up of their knowledge. But really, I suppose the main bit of value I add to them pre-settlement is just helping them work out what assets they have, potentially what could be an equitable division of those assets. And then, ultimately, just like any financial planner will deal with, looking at their potential cash flow over the future, their post-divorce finances, working out what they need to really, be able to meet their financial needs over the long term, just to ensure that long-term peace of mind that they'll be kind of financially independent. And a huge part of that is looking at the pensions that both parties have and making sure those are dealt with fairly. As we know in our industry, pensions aren't simple and can often be one of the largest assets in a marriage. It's generally the family home and the pensions that are the largest assets. So it's really just kind of helping them work out what pensions they have, how potentially they could be split fairly, and just looking at what that means to them in terms of potential future income.
Definitely. I mean, it's such a huge, it's a minefield to try and navigate something like that, I imagine. What are some of the challenges that you kind of come up against and face when you're trying to work out what the solution is to those things?
Sure. So first and foremost, it's just making sure that the client understands what the pensions are, whether it's a defined benefit pension that's being looked at, whether it's defined contribution, just making them aware that it's not as easy as just adding them up and dividing them by 2 in terms of getting a fair split, just making them aware that how a defined benefit, particularly a public sector defined benefit pension, is valued is very different to that of a defined contribution. The mechanics of pension sharing, and if you were to apply a pension share against, say, an NHS pension, that would actually result in you receiving a pension credit, which creates your own NHS pension. Whereas with a lot of defined benefit pensions in the private sector, they generally would have to be transferred away from that scheme and into a defined contribution. So essentially from DB over to DC. So again, it's just making them aware of what that means for them in terms of how they can access their pension flexibly, from what age, the lump sum, how potentially they could use that for rehoming. But usually, because when there's a lot of complexity in the different types of pensions that they have, and especially where the values are quite high, we'd certainly usually recommend that the parties instruct an independent expert to look at the pensions. And we call these PODs. So these are pension on divorce experts. And those would be instructed by both parties on a neutral basis to look at all the pensions objectively and work out the fairest way of splitting them so that each party maximizes the benefits available to them. And one of the interesting ways that they would do that is, instead of looking at equalizing by the amount of the value that is within these pensions, is to actually equalize the amount of income that they're expected to be generating in retirement. So it's very common for the POD to be instructed to work out what pension share should be done in order to make sure both parties have equal income at, say, age 65, their retirement age. And then what they would do then is provide a very detailed, chunky report, probably 50, 60 pages long, talking about the minutiae of pensions and all the calculations. So it's very common for me to be brought in at this stage to basically try and convert that to simple English, try and take the jargon away from it and explain in simple terms what that means to my client. And really, based on what the POD is saying, what would that pension share mean to them? And that's a really good way to start bringing in things like cash flow modeling to say, post separation, if you were to add this pension credit across from your pension share, what would that mean to you? How could you access it? How could you try and reduce tax? And ultimately, how can you meet your needs over the long term? So that's a really good time for me to get involved, because it's taking quite a complex, detailed report and using the financial planning skills that we have in kind of just converting that to simple English, really, and just working out ultimately what it means to you as a client.
Yeah, and I can imagine if if you're dealing with someone this isn't their background, this isn't their wheelhouse, this isn't kind of conversation that they're used to having, it can feel incredibly overwhelming. And to be able to, like you said, present this to them in a way that is kind of able to understand and work out, you know, have control over their financial future is really, really beneficial and useful. And there's so much there that I think are really interesting specifics. Are there any kind of tips or tricks or kind of areas that you've learned along the way that you found useful in navigating some of these more technical situations that you would find yourself in? Yeah, is there anything that you didn't know before when having a lot of experience you now utilize a lot?
Yeah, sure. So I think when it comes to, I mean, for anyone who's considering coming into divorce financial planning, definitely do it. I mean, there's plenty of work going around. I mean, just in the Bristol area, I think there's about 200 family lawyers operating, and probably only 6 of us that specialize in this area. So there's certainly enough work to go around. And when it comes to starting along the path of getting involved in supporting these types of clients, because you do need to kind of learn about the legal side of things, what legal precedent there is in terms of parity when it comes to splitting assets. But really, I think pensions is the main value add that we can give to family lawyers and their clients. And the best way to get started with that is to read a report called the PAG report. So PAG, that stands for the Pension Advisory Group. They initially produced a report in 2019, which they've just gone and updated. I think it was about 6 weeks ago. They've got a new version of the report. And really what this is pretty much the Bible in terms of how to split pensions fairly on divorce, what the legal precedent is, and what you should look at in terms of the different intricacies involved. So if anyone wants to get started, that's the place to get started, essentially. And when I was getting started, the original PAG report was invaluable to me, because I was able to then, again, like I do with clients and code reports, I was able to learn and absorb the PAG report and then convey that information to family lawyers, which is very beneficial to them. And just as an example as to one of the intricacies, as you were mentioning, is a concept called offsetting. So normally when you look at pensions, you want to try and split them equally, essentially, and treat them as a completely separate asset to all of your other non-pension assets. But occasionally, it might be the case where one of the parties wants to retain the family home, and in doing so, they'll give up some of their right to a pension share. So what we call that is pension offsetting. So you're kind of offsetting your right to having a share of that pension in exchange for more of the non-pension assets, which is quite commonly done, but it's a bit of and in fact, it's one of the largest potential sources of negligence claims against family lawyers, because if you go into an offsetting arrangement without really looking at the intricacies involved, you could be massively disadvantaging your client. So that's when it very, very much helps to get someone like myself involved, just to make sure that these pensions are being valued on a fair basis, and any offsetting arrangements have a methodical approach to them that's fair to both parties. And again, the PAG report covers offsetting in a good amount of detail, so just showing different approaches and best practice.
Definitely. Oh, some fantastic practical tips there from Daniel. Fantastic. And so, moving away perhaps from some of the kind of technical things explicitly, and just kind of thinking about some misconceptions people might have about divorce planning, is there anything that comes to mind to you that you might think that the average financial planner or people out there who don't necessarily specialize in this area might have about what the work entails and what it's like?
Sure. So I suppose misconceptions, especially to myself before I started actively engaging this area, was that couples divorcing would just split everything down the middle. So that's a bit of a misconception, that a 50-50 split would always lead to fairness between the parties, because each case is completely different, as you can probably appreciate. And this is where it helps to be actively involved with the legal side of things as well, with the family lawyers, because they can help you work out the potential for the parties' future earning capacity, their age, their health, and there's various other aspects that will go into working out what the starting point of a fair split might look like. So there's sort of that dynamic that needs to be considered. And again, it wouldn't be for me to comment on what I think would be a fair way of splitting the parties' assets. It's really would start with the legal viewpoint, and then me as a financial expert would then kind of look at what that means to the client over the long term. Another thing is that I suppose people would probably underestimate the emotional dynamics at play as well during divorce. I've dealt with a lot of clients that, you know, have been, I suppose, blindsided by their partners and just really weren't expecting the marriage or, you know, relationship to break down. So, you know, understandably, they can be very emotional in these meetings because they go from being in what they think was a happy relationship to suddenly now working out, oh gosh, I'm going to be on my own, and will I be okay? So there's certainly a lot of kind of emotional dynamics that need to be, you know, sensitively addressed as well during proceedings.
Yeah, for sure. And I really am wanting to kind of dig down into that that emotional side of things. But before we do, I have, maybe I'm projecting with this next question, and maybe it's a little bit cheeky, but as you describe, you know, I don't have any say over, you know, how they do things or what I think is fair. Is there ever any part of you when you're dealing with these clients secretly that are like, oh, you know, if I was you, I would do this or I would do that? Do you ever get frustrated about not being able to kind of have a say in that way, or do you find it kind of a relief that, you know, you can just deal with what they want and kind of work from there?
Yeah, in a way, I suppose, because I suppose, you know, ourselves, we know generally what is best financial practice for each of us. So, for example, if I'm helping a client with a lump sum settlement, you know, I'll know what proper financial planning advice should be given with regards to that in terms of utilizing basic tax advantages such as ISAs and pensions. So when they turn to me and say, well, actually, I'm going to put this in a holiday home abroad, then, you know, that probably wouldn't be my initial kind of view in terms of what would be the best outcome for that money. But ultimately, it's the client's goals, and, you know, you can kind of try and lead them towards what would be, you know, a good financial planning outcome, but you can't necessarily make them do that. And also, I just dealt with a client last week who has a decent sized NHS pension and also a decent sized private defined contribution pension. And, you know, for me, I know it's probably best to try and retain the NHS pension where possible, because you then have a solid underpin of guaranteed income for the rest of your life. But actually, she was talking about giving up that NHS pension to try and keep the defined contribution pension, because she'll be able to access, you know, a better lump sum and the proceeds of that, you know, at an earlier age. So, you know, as much as I could kind of tell them, you know, you're potentially foregoing a good, decent amount of income over the long term in exchange for access now, again, that's probably not the best financial outcome for them. But, you know, ultimately, all you can do is tell them, you know, give them guidance and advice as far as you can, and yeah, hope that they make the, I suppose, the correct decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's the thing, you know, in all kind of financial planning, all you can do is present what some options and what people could do, but at the end of the day, it's their life and they can live it in whatever way they see fit. And it's part of our job to just help facilitate that as best as possible. And sometimes, even if you think it's not quite exactly what you'd do, you just have to kind of accept that and let them do whatever they think is best, because we don't know their lives at the end of the day.
No, yeah, like I say, it's all about trying to lead them to making that informed choice, and whether that choice is the one you would have gone with. Yeah, it's I suppose it's each client's different, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. That was just I think it's me projecting. I think it's always you know, wanting to get in and go, oh, what about this, and do this, and you have to take a step back and go, no. But anyway, moving on to kind of discussing divorce, and as you mentioned in the previous question, there is a huge emotional side to these conversations. The context of which this separation is happening could be in a variety of difficult situations. It's clearly a sensitive topic. How should financial planners approach these conversations, considering that kind of emotional side?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I kind of go into it assuming that each client I deal with is vulnerable. Even if they feel kind of empowered and confident going through the divorce or separation process, I still kind of go in treating them essentially as a vulnerable client, because you never know really what someone's thinking or how well they're putting up a bit of a shield in terms of, you know, showing, you know, how they truly feel. So yeah, it's incredibly important to go into it with you know, as much empathy and patience as possible. but then also kind of stressing things like, confidentiality as well. We're trying to create a safe kind of non-judgmental space that we can kind of discuss their concerns and their feelings and, their long-term goals, essentially. So yeah, it's not just providing that financial support, but that, emotional support as well. But also I'm kind of very conscious of the fact that I don't have the sufficient training or skill set necessarily to provide the emotional support, especially for some clients who are really going through, quite a terrible time. So I'm very conscious of being able to refer to other professionals that are better suited to that. So we do work a lot with therapists and divorce coaches who are able to kind of support clients more on an emotional side and really kind of get to the root of what they're feeling and help them through the process. So I really kind of consider it as a bit of a triangle approach, in a lot of cases where you have the legal, the financial, and the emotional aspect, and between the three of us, we can really provide that kind of full package support for the client.
Yeah, definitely. And it's such an important point, isn't it? Obviously, there's different techniques and strategies that you can use in your position to help people feel comfortable and safe when they're discussing these issues. But like you said, you're not a trained therapist. That's not what we do. And so having those people as part of that's a great the triangle is really interesting. Is that a partnership that you kind of established early on? Was that always do you have trusted people that you refer people to? Has that grown organically? How has that worked for you?
Yeah, so I suppose the community of professionals that specialize in divorce is, I suppose, quite a tight-knit community. Not to the point where we're kind of shunning outsiders. We're always happy to have other people come in, but because it's quite a niche area to be giving advice, it's quite a small community. So we do all know each other, I suppose, all the local legal professionals, mediators, divorce coaches, therapists, financial planners, and we actually have a few kind of regional groups as well, where we kind of get together and meet up and share best practice. And through that kind of network, we can kind of do kind of referrals to each other, as appropriate. But yeah, it's very common for us to be all engaged in with the same clients, because we will provide that specific support as and when needed.
Definitely. That's awesome. So moving back towards where you sit in that triangle then, and doing the best you can for your clients, are there specific communication strategies or best practices that you've specifically found effective in these discussions?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, in kind of general financial planning terms, it's all about active listening, trying to get to the root of, what the client's needs and goals are over the long term. And in addition to active listening, communicating back to them as simply and jargon-free as possible. That applies to all clients, not just divorce clients. But I think with regard to the clients that I deal with, there's certainly a level of probably less financial understanding. Like I said, it's often the party in the relationship who has probably had less control over the assets in the marriage, so probably doesn't really know necessarily what their budget is, or really what assets they have or what they mean, or what that can provide them in terms of future income. So it's a big part of my role with them is to build and level up their financial knowledge, just to kind of help them feel empowered, which is particularly useful because occasionally through the legal process you might have a round table approach that's been adopted, where all parties will sit around one table with their legal representatives and sort of come to an agreement in terms of a settlement. So it's really important for me to help my client get a decent level of knowledge, so that when they're sat around that table, they know everything that's being discussed, what it means to them, and that kind of helps them move forward. Because without that sort of financial coaching, they'd often probably feel like they're maybe in a position where they're quite vulnerable, could be taken advantage of, especially if they're not really understanding what's being discussed in terms of the settlement. So it's very important for me to kind of make sure that they have that kind of base level of knowledge and really know what it means to them.
Yeah. And you said before, obviously now you can kind of expand the area of clients that you deal with, as a lot of work is done online now. Would you have any differences in your approach at all to dealing with clients purely digitally, virtually, as opposed to in person, or is it the exact same way that you'd approach both of those meetings?
I'd say the majority of my meetings are held remotely, to be honest, partly because, especially when I'm dealing with a new client, I always offer a free initial meeting at no charge, just to learn a bit more about them and see if there's any value I can add. So that often tends to be done remotely because I suppose it'd be quite costly to drive around with these speculative meetings. So I do a lot of remote meetings, and they actually work quite well. If I'm doing a cash flow, I can share my screen and show that. But yeah, for the meetings that I do face to face, I suppose it's a bit easier to establish. I suppose you have, I suppose, more cues in terms of verbal and non-verbal cues. So you're kind of, it's easier when you're face to face to tell whether someone is really following what you're saying. Whereas, if it's remote, it's probably a bit less obvious. But for the most part, I'd say it's quite similar. One trend that I have noticed recently, which is quite interesting, is, and I'm very open to it, is for clients to invite friends or family along to the meetings as well. Again, just to provide an extra layer of support and understanding, because an extra set of eyes and ears can definitely help, especially when it comes to maybe relaying some of that information back to the client. So I've got a meeting this afternoon with a client who has had their parents involved in the process, just to kind of give them that extra reassurance that they are fully understanding what's being discussed, and again, just helps them be more confident making future decisions.
Definitely. And I can understand if you feel in a vulnerable position that you would want to have somebody else to just help you make sure that you're doing the right thing. So I guess that makes a lot of sense. And do you find that clients are more relaxed then if there's other people in the meeting? Is it easier, or are there some kind of obstacles to that? Is it kind of other voices that come in that you have to build relationships with too?
No, I'd say it makes things easier, to be honest, because sometimes friends and family are better at reading the client in terms of, if they spot, okay, I don't think you maybe understood that concept, so they'll repeat it back, whereas it might have been difficult for me to spot these cues. But then there's also been times as well where I've explained something which the parents have understood, but the client hasn't, and they've reworded it in a way that they think the client might understand. So that, it all goes towards helping to make sure that the client is fully aware of what's being discussed and is confident about everything. So yeah, it only helps things, I'd say. Yeah,
amazing. And obviously divorce is more than just finances, and as you've explained, that's why there's other professions that kind of come into play. But as a financial planner, are there other non-financial aspects of the process that you need to make sure that you're taking into account?
I suppose it's mostly the emotional well-being side of things. So just, again, making sure that to the level that I can, I provide that support as required to the client, or refer to the other professionals as needed. I think one of the key long-term goals that all my clients will have is they, first and foremost, just want to be okay. They want to be, I suppose, empowered, in control of their decisions. And really, a lot of people just want a clean break. That's a term that comes up quite a lot in divorce work. They want to be able to go through proceedings, have everything agreed, and then that's it. No more contact with the ex-spouse if possible. I mean, difficult to do if there's children involved, but for the most part, if they can draw a line under all the finances inside of things, then they can move forward. So I think, having a clean break is quite important. So having me on board to try and help them facilitate that is very beneficial to them. But yeah, again, it's just kind of identifying the need to maybe refer to other professionals as needed, particularly when it comes to the emotional support side of things.
Yeah, for sure. Amazing. And there's so much intricacy to this, and there's a couple of other questions that I want to ask you at the end. But before we kind of move on to the final questions, and we finish kind of looking at this side of things. My last question on this is, in terms of divorce financial planning, are there, on the whole, differences then, or specific challenges? I mean, we've talked about quite a few actually, but if you could sum it up, what do you think are the main differences between this as a specialism in terms of financial planning and just going into your day-to-day, if there is such a quote-unquote average client? What are the main differences or obstacles?
Sure. So I think it would probably come back to that kind of support triangle like I discussed before. So it's quite rare in financial planning to have the need for a legal, financial and emotional support for a client all as one kind of one package. At Centurion, we do specialize solely